This happened back in the summer of 2016. I was at this huge bonfire gathering at a place we called the desert. It's this big wooded area with the Missouri River running right through it, and there are sandy riverbeds everywhere, which is probably why we gave it that name. The whole place has this crazy maze of trails winding through the trees. People are constantly out there on dirt bikes and ATVs, flying around those paths like maniacs. You can always hear engines revving and bikes zooming past. It was the kind of spot where everyone would come to hang out, especially on summer nights. The bonfire was going strong, music was playing, and people were just having a good time. Anyway, it was probably around 11 p.m. by then. I had walked back to my car to grab a cigarette and figured I'd take a leak while I was away from everyone. Oh, I should mention that I wasn't drinking or anything that night. I had volunteered to be the designated driver, so I was completely sober. That's what makes this whole thing so much weirder. I wasn't imagining things or anything like that. So there I was, standing there taking a piss in the dark, when I suddenly heard someone call out my name. It came from this really dark, dense part of the woods off to the side, like the kind of dark where you can't see anything at all. It definitely got my attention. So I called out, "Hey, I'm pissing. What do you want?" But I didn't get any response, so I just shrugged it off and finished doing my business. But then I heard my name again, except this time it was coming from the complete opposite side of the woods, like way off to the other direction. So I yelled out again, louder this time. Still nothing. At that point, I started walking into the woods along one of the dirt bike paths. I was pretty sure someone was just screwing with me, trying to freak me out or whatever. But then I caught a glimpse of something weird. It looked like a light blue color, almost glowing and moving around between the trees. I stopped in my tracks, and that's when I heard my name again. But it wasn't a shout this time. It was more like a whisper, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, all around me. But the strangest part was I wasn't afraid, not even a little bit. So I just kept walking forward. I went pretty deep into those woods. I knew I was far in because I couldn't see the bonfire anymore, and that thing had been absolutely huge. Then I saw it again, that blue shape. It stepped out from behind a tree and just stood there for a second, long enough for me to finally see what it was. It was this glowing figure, incredibly thin and probably around 8 feet tall. The color was the most beautiful, brilliant blue I've ever seen in my entire life. I can't even really describe it properly. Now, most people in that situation would have turned around and bolted out of there as fast as their legs could carry them. But here's the thing. This creature, or whatever it was, gave off this weird energy. It was like this overwhelming feeling of love and warmth, almost mesmerizing. When I think back on it now, I realize I felt completely drawn to it. I was definitely in some kind of trance-like state. So instead of running away, I just kept walking straight toward it. In my mind, all I kept thinking was, I have to get to this thing and need to hug it. Like, why the hell was that my first thought? I have no clue. The feeling rushing through my head was so completely backwards and bizarre, I honestly can't even put it into words. It was one of those things where you really had to be there to understand the feeling that came with it.
Black Friday deals start now. Save up to $1,000 on special deals during Raymore and Flanagan's early Black Friday sale. Or explore monthly financing options and find the...
Anyway, by this point, I was maybe 100 feet away from this creature, close enough to start making out actual details. I could see definitions on its face, like the structure of its features, and then I noticed its hands. It had 3 fingers. Yeah, 3 fingers on each hand. At the time, that didn't freak me out even a little bit, which is insane when I think about it now. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid that was. But in the moment, it felt completely normal. Then suddenly, I just stopped dead in my tracks, like someone hit the brakes in my brain. This thought absolutely slammed into my head. Shane, if you take one more step toward this thing, nobody will ever see you again. You'll just be another statistic, another person who went missing in the woods and never came back. Going from that weird, almost happy and loving feeling to complete terror was the strangest sensation I've ever experienced. Anyway, I started backing up slowly, keeping my eyes on it. And then this being actually started taking steps toward me. I thought for sure this thing was going to come running after me, and that would be it. So I turned around and absolutely booked it. I'm talking full-on sprinting like an Olympic runner, crashing through branches and everything. The second I could see that bonfire glowing through the trees again, I started screaming my friends' names at the top of my lungs. I've never been so glad to see other people in my entire life. I'm really lucky that the path I chose to take into the woods was basically a straight shot from where I started. Because honestly, with how willing I was to follow that thing, it could have easily led me down all sorts of twisting paths and gotten me completely lost. That wooded area is absolutely massive, and there are dirt bike trails crisscrossing everywhere. It's like a maze in there. If I had wandered off the main path following that creature, who knows where I would have ended up. I might not have been able to find my way back to the bonfire at all. The whole place is just this confusing network of trails going in every direction. So yeah, I got really lucky that I stayed on that one straight path, or things could have gone very differently. When I finally made it back to the bonfire, I was out of breath and probably looked crazy. I told everyone what had just happened to me out there. A few of my friends didn't believe me at first, but they could tell I was genuinely shaken up. So a group of them grabbed some flashlights and headed into the woods to look for this blue being I was talking about. They searched around for a while but didn't find anything. No trace of it at all. But here's the part that really messed with my head. My friends told me I'd been gone for over an hour, or maybe even longer, but I couldn't believe it. To me, it felt like I was only out there for maybe 10 minutes or 15 tops. The time just didn't add up at all. Anyway, I'm convinced now that there's some kind of entity, or maybe multiple entities, living in those woods at Kimball Bottoms. So this really weird thing happened to me about a month ago, and I've been kind of hesitant to talk about it because, honestly, I don't want people thinking I've lost my mind or something. But it's been bugging me, and I'm curious if maybe someone else out there has gone through something similar. For context, I'm 36, pretty active, and I spend a lot of time hiking by myself. It's kind of my thing, you know? I go out on trails a few times a week, sometimes just for a quick jog, other times for longer hikes. It helps me clear my head and stay in shape. I've been doing this for years, so I know the trails around here pretty well, and I'm comfortable being out there alone. Anyway, so I headed out for a hike in the woods here in North Dakota. I'd been walking along this trail I've done probably 100 times before, maybe 20 minutes in or so, when I saw something that I still can't really explain. The only way I can describe it is like that cloaking effect from the Predator movies. Not the alien's actual face or anything like that, but that transparent, almost shimmery thing where you can see through it, like the air was distorted or bent around something. And this thing was shaped like a person and maybe standing 30 or 40 feet away from me. But I'm not gonna lie, I got really freaking scared. I'm out there completely alone in the middle of the woods, probably a good mile or two from my car, and my phone has zero signal out there. It's not like I could call 911 even if I wanted to. What would I even say, right? But in that moment, that whole fight or flight survival instinct thing just kicked in hard. But instead of running, which looking back, maybe I should have, I just started yelling at it, like full-on shouting. I'm screaming stuff like, "Come on, be a man. Let's go one-on-one right now." I was trying to sound tough, I guess. Maybe challenge it or scare it off or something. After a few seconds of this standoff, something in me just snapped, and I thought, you know what? Screw it.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies.
I might as well just charge this thing. So I lunged forward. And I mean, I really went for it. Tried to throw a hook punch right at where I thought its head would be. And I kid you not, it was like the thing just blinked out of existence for a split second. Like it teleported or something. One moment I'm about to make contact, and the next moment it's standing like 10 feet away from me, maybe more. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I ran after it, trying to close the distance, throwing jabs, trying to land something, anything. I'm swinging and missing, swinging and missing. And then, I don't even know how to describe this part. It either touched me or pushed me, but I didn't really feel a solid hit. It was more like a force. And suddenly I'm airborne, like actually flying backwards through the air. I was laying there for a second trying to catch my breath, making sure nothing was broken. When I finally managed to get myself up off the ground and looked around, there was nothing there. The thing was just gone. Just me standing there alone on the trail with my back killing me. I still don't know if what I saw was actually real. Like I know I saw something. But what the hell was it? I keep going over it in my head and it doesn't make sense. But I need to stress this again. I am not crazy, and I was completely sober and clear-headed. This happened exactly the way I'm describing it. Whatever that thing was out there in those woods, it's way, way stronger than any human being. Like not even close. I don't understand how it works, or what kind of force it used. But it barely touched me, and it sent me flying backwards into a tree, like I weighed nothing. I'm pretty damn sure all my punches, all my martial arts training, all of it, didn't do a single thing to it. I might as well have been swinging at air. So if anyone's thinking they could fight one of these things, forget it. Whatever techniques you know, they're not gonna help. So I guess my question is, has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? I can't be the only person this has happened to, right? I've been losing sleep over this for the past month, and I just need to know I'm not going insane here. So this literally just happened maybe an hour and a half ago while I was heading home from work. I live in San Antonio, right in the middle of Texas. Now the whole thing went down super fast. I'd say somewhere between 30 and 45 seconds. But honestly, it felt way quicker than that. So I was driving on this elevated section of highway, Wurzbach Parkway, if you're familiar with San Antonio at all. I was going northbound, on that stretch where you're basically cutting across from Highway 281 over to I-35. It's not a long stretch or anything, but it's elevated, so you're up pretty high. I was driving past the airport just after a place called Thousand Oaks. That's where the highway becomes straight for a few miles before it goes back down to ground level. It was raining that night, and there aren't many streetlights on that part of the road, so it was pretty dark. I was going about 60 or 65 miles per hour. I drive a small sedan, so I sit pretty low and close to the road. There was nobody else on the highway with me, not in my direction or the other direction. The only other car I could see was way behind me, maybe several miles back. I could just see their headlights in the distance. Now, up ahead in the distance, maybe half a mile away or so, I saw what looked like a person running or jogging on the right side of the road. It looked like a man, just a human shape. Yeah, it was weird because it was almost 1 in the morning and we were on a raised highway, but I didn't think it was that strange at first. San Antonio has a lot of drunk people wandering around, and I've seen weirder stuff happen. But just to be safe, I moved from the right lane over to the left lane. As I got closer though, I started to notice something weird. The silhouette wasn't getting bigger or taller like it should. It stayed the exact same height the entire time I was driving toward it. I'd say it was maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. That's my best guess anyway, because when I finally got close, its head was about level with the hood of my car. At this point, I slowed way down, probably to about 50 or 55 miles per hour. I was just staring at the back of this thing, trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at. My windshield was covered in rain, so the wipers were going, and everything looked kind of blurry and distorted. Then something really strange happened. The moment I got close enough that my headlights were fully lighting this thing up, it just dropped. Like instantly went down on all fours. Like it was trying to pretend to be some kind of animal. It happened so fast, almost like a reflex or something. I know for sure this wasn't any animal I've ever seen before. It was about the size of a medium-sized coyote, but the way it was running was totally different. It was moving like a person trying to run like an animal, if that makes sense. Its back end was lifted up in the air, and I could clearly see it had buttocks, like a human, and its legs were kicking out to the sides in this weird way. You know those documentaries about feral children? Kids who grew up in the wild. That's kind of what the movement looked like. But here's the thing. No human I've ever seen could run on all fours as fast as this thing was moving. It was going way too fast, and its skin was this oily black color, really dark and smooth looking. Now the rain was just pouring down on it, and you could see the water glistening off its skin. The streetlights in my headlights were catching it just right, and I could actually make out the muscle tone on this thing. You could see the muscles moving under the skin as it ran. When it dropped down from 2 legs to all fours, it definitely lost some speed. I'm still not sure if it slowed down on purpose, or if it was just because of the awkward way it had to move on all fours. So I'm passing this thing, right? And that's when it happens. It looks back over its left shoulder, directly at me, and I got a clear view of its face. The face was completely flat, like unnaturally flat. Not like how a normal human face has depth to it. The nose was wide and flat too, spread across the face. The eyes didn't glow or reflect light like an animal's eyes do at night, which I thought was strange. They were just these big eyes standing out against the black skin. Though now that I think about it, it never looked directly into my headlight beams, so maybe that's why they didn't glow. I don't know if that matters or not. At one point, while it was looking at me as I drove past, it opened its mouth. The teeth were flat and white, like human teeth. But the canine teeth, the pointy ones, were bigger than normal. It had hands and feet just like a person would, but overall it looked male. Just the general shape and build of it seemed masculine. And here's the thing, the body proportions were completely normal. It looked like a regular human body, just scaled down to 3 or 4 feet tall. It didn't have those crazy long limbs you hear about in some creature stories, or a weird shaped torso or anything like that. The arms were the right length for the body. The legs made sense. Everything was proportionate. Just a smaller version of a normal person, if that makes sense. I did try to grab my phone at some point, I was fumbling around for it in my cup holder, or wherever the hell I'd tossed it, trying to get it unlocked so I could snap a picture. But honestly, I couldn't get my shit together enough to actually do it. My hands were shaking a little, and I was just so completely absorbed in what I was looking at, while also not crashing my car on this dark, wet highway. And if I'm being real, part of me knew a photo probably wouldn't show anything anyway. It was pitch black out there except for my headlights. The rain was coming down pretty good, and I'd be shooting through my car window which had rain all over it. I just figured it would end up being some dark, blurry blob that wouldn't prove anything to anyone. But now I'm seriously thinking about buying a dash cam for my car. I really hope that car that was way behind me saw this thing too. It was pretty hard to miss, so maybe they did. I hope I've given enough details here to paint a clear picture of what happened. Honestly, I have no clue what I just saw, but I'm actually kind of glad I saw it, as weird as that sounds. The thing didn't seem mean or aggressive or anything like that. It actually looked scared to me, like it wasn't happy to be up there on that highway and just wanted to get down to ground level. I got this really strong feeling that the only reason it dropped down onto all fours was to try and look like an animal, like it was trying to blend in or not draw attention to itself. The thing didn't have too far to go before it would hit the exit ramp, maybe another quarter mile or so. But that's what's kind of puzzling to me, because right there at that exit, there's a gas station that's lit up bright as hell, 24 hours. And there's a busy intersection right there too, with stoplights and everything. Not exactly the best place to be if you're trying to stay hidden. When I think about what's actually in that area, there's really not much around that stretch of highway. You've got a few apartment complexes here and there, some industrial buildings and warehouses scattered around. Oh, and now that I'm thinking about it, there's this old concrete plant in that area. It's been abandoned for years, just sitting there empty next to the highway. Maybe that's where it was headed, or coming from, I don't know. But it's one of the few places around there that's deserted, and would give something a place to hide. If you live in San Antonio or know the area, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about, and where all this stuff is located. That abandoned concrete plant was actually my first thought. Like maybe that's where this thing came from. But the weird part is, it was running away from that area and heading toward the more populated parts, with the gas station and apartments. So that doesn't really make sense, does it? I'm still just completely blown away that I saw this. Like I can't stop thinking about it.
I've been hiking solo for about 6 years now. I'm comfortable enough in the wilderness that I don't need to stick to main trails anymore, which is probably what got me into this situation in the first place. This happened last October in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I'd driven up from Virginia for a long weekend, planning to hit some of the more remote sections that didn't see much traffic. The weather was perfect, mid-50s if I had to guess. Overcast, but not rainy. I was looking forward to some real solitude. I was maybe 4 hours into the hike when I reached what I can only describe as a gorge. It wasn't some massive canyon or anything, but it was deep enough, probably 30 or 40 feet down to a rocky bottom with a small creek running through it. Not a guaranteed death if you fell, but you'd definitely break something, and the walls looked impossible to climb with all that loose shale and overhang. There was this massive fallen oak wedged between both sides at a slight angle. It was pretty thick. The bark was worn smooth from weather and probably other hikers using it as a bridge. I inspected it for a few minutes to make sure it was sturdy, then decided it looked solid enough for me. I took my time getting across, trying to maintain focus. I safely reached the other side, and by the time I was back on solid ground, I realized I'd gotten a really nice adrenaline rush from the balancing act. But then I heard this rhythmic thunking sound behind me. I turned around, and there was a guy on the other side of the gorge, maybe 10 feet from where the tree met the bank. He was older, definitely in his 50s, wearing this ratty camo jacket and old-looking jeans. He also had a scraggly beard that made him kind of look like your stereotypical lumberjack. It took me a second to realize what he was holding. It was an axe, a full-size axe. Maybe he really was a lumberjack, but I couldn't think. I was still in shock at the sight of it. He walked right over to the base of the tree and started swinging his axe at it. I shouted across at him, asking what the hell he was doing. He didn't even look up, he just kept swinging. To my horror, I watched as one of his swings landed a little deeper than the others. The tree shifted slightly. I yelled louder, telling him to stop, and that I'd just crossed the gorge on that thing. It dawned on me that this guy probably already knew that, and he was trying to strand me on the other side. He didn't show any signs of stopping, so I yelled increasingly insulting things at him, stuff that didn't even make sense. I finally yelled that I'd need to cross back to the other side, and that's when he finally looked up at me and said, "That's not my problem." He said it so casually, like I'd asked him about the weather. I don't know why, but his casual tone infuriated me, and I admit I kind of lost it a little. I started full-on screaming at him. I said some nasty things, and in hindsight, that probably wasn't the brightest decision. I can't remember exactly what, but something I must have said hit a nerve because he stopped swinging the axe abruptly. He actually set it down on the ground before taking a few steps closer to the edge. I could see his face more clearly after that, and it was not a pleasant sight. His eyes were sunken and dark almost, like the skin around them was dark too, if that makes any sense. He leaned over the edge and told me something that I'll never forget. "I know these woods a lot better than you do." Something about the way he said it scared me. Not threatening exactly, but certain, like he was stating a fact I'd be stupid to argue with. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then he picked up the axe, turned around, and walked back into the trees. I didn't say anything after him. What was there to say? I stood there trying to process what had happened. The tree was still wedged in place, but I could tell it wasn't stable anymore. The edge on his side was splintered and cracked. I wanted to cross back to the other side right then and there, but there was no way I was entrusting my weight to that tree now. I pulled out my phone, but it had zero service. I decided to cut the hike short. I was mad for sure, but I was also genuinely spooked. I think anyone else in my position would have been too. Something about that encounter felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I started walking downstream, figuring I'd find another crossing and it would take me back in the direction I'd come from anyway. But I was dead wrong. I walked for what must have been an hour, and the gorge only got deeper. I was pretty sure the gap was widening too. I kept thinking I'd find a spot where I could cross, but every turn just revealed more impossible terrain. To make matters worse, the sun was starting to drop. I was beginning to panic. It was getting dark, and I was miles from my car in the opposite direction I needed to go. I started seriously considering whether I'd have to climb down into the gorge and back out, as insane as that seemed. Just then, I stumbled on what looked like a campsite. It was sitting in this little clearing with a fire pit that looked recently used. At first, I was relieved that maybe there was a fellow camper or hiker that could help me, but the more I looked around, the more wrong it felt. I realized that there were these carvings on the surrounding trees, not like initials or anything recognizable, just these deep gouges and symbols. There were also a bunch of weird objects scattered around, like rusted tools and pieces of cloth tied to branches, what looked like animal bones arranged in patterns. It was freaky. As soon as I saw that stuff, I basically hightailed it out of there. I was about twice as scared as I had been 2 minutes ago, which was saying something. And then, as if it couldn't get any worse, I started hearing sounds behind me, stalking me. Footsteps, or something like footsteps. Every time I spun around though, everything went silent. I started thinking some kind of predator was trailing me. I picked up my pace, hoping whatever was behind me would lose interest. But no. If anything, the sounds only got louder and honestly a little closer. What happened next is still the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. As soon as I heard the next sound, I looked over my shoulder for like the 20th time and caught a glimpse of someone ducking behind a tree. A person. I froze and scanned the trees, and I realized there wasn't just one. There was another figure further to the left. They'd fanned out. I was being herded. I don't know what made me realize they'd given up on hiding, but suddenly I could hear them moving more openly. I saw what looked like a pipe or a club in one of their hands, and that was it. I just started running, knowing I couldn't play dumb for much longer. And the exact thing I was dreading happened. They started chasing after me, clearly not concerned with being stealthy anymore. I can't explain how scary it was. I didn't even know what they wanted. I was in the middle of the woods, lost, and the sun had almost set. I felt like I was in a life or death situation, which is probably how I was able to run so fast for so long. I ran faster than I knew I could, and definitely faster than I'd ever run before. One of the people behind me started screaming. Not words, just screams, like war cry type screams. The stuff of nightmares, and I mean that. I kept running. The gorge was still on my left, and just when I felt myself slowing down out of exhaustion, I saw another fallen tree. It was much smaller than the first one had been, but I didn't have a choice. Without thinking, I mounted it and started making my way across. I didn't even have time to see if it was sturdy. Thinking about it now, I was betting my entire life on a tree. It was so tense and I was so tired that I honestly thought I was going to slip and fall. It held up and I made it across. As soon as I made it, I turned around. There were actually 3 figures following me, and they all looked like carbon copies of that first guy who had stranded me. They were filthy, and one of them was in fact holding a pipe. I watched as the first one put his hand on the tree like he was going to cross, then he stepped back down. The 3 of them looked at me menacingly, and for some reason, I found myself unable to move again. Then one of them told me to get the f out of there, and that I had gotten lucky, and that was all I needed to hear. I turned and did exactly what they told me to. I kept expecting to hear them behind me, but the forest had gone eerily quiet. The darkness didn't help either, and there were a couple times when I had to fight a full-on breakdown. I must have run at an angle that eventually brought me back toward the trailhead, or maybe I had just gotten impossibly lucky, but I did eventually find it. I reported what I could after driving back home, but I knew there was nothing anyone could or would do. It's been months now. I still hike, but it's honestly not as enjoyable anymore. I really hope I start enjoying it again, because hiking used to be my absolute favorite thing to do, and now I can't even enjoy it without thinking about that experience. It was just so freaky. That first guy with the axe especially. The way he looked at me when he said those things, as if he knew exactly what was going to happen to me. He probably did. Hell, he had probably orchestrated it all. It terrifies me to think that I might have lost my life that day in the woods. This happened 3 years ago. I know a lot of people drag things out, but I don't see the need to do that, so I'm just going to say exactly what happened as it happened. I was hiking through a remote section of forest in northern Minnesota, way off any marked trails. I've always preferred it that way. The actual wilderness, not the sanitized version you get on popular trails with their wooden markers and worn paths. Just me and the woods, the way they're supposed to be. I'd been out there for maybe 4 hours when I noticed I'd lost my bearings. It happens sometimes when you're not following a trail, but usually I can orient myself pretty quickly. This time was different. Nothing looked familiar. The sun was still high enough that I wasn't in immediate danger, but that sick feeling of being lost was already settling into my stomach. I tried to stay calm and kept walking, telling myself I'd spot something recognizable soon. But instead, I started picking up on this rustling sound behind me, the last thing you'd want to hear if you're in my position. The rustling wasn't constant, just every 30 seconds or so, like something was matching my pace. I'd stop, and it would stop too. I'd start walking, and there it was again. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer, but I'd hiked enough times to know that deer don't follow people like that. I kept going, but at that point, I was pretty sure I was being stalked by something. And then, all at once, the rustling turned into movement all around me. It was a worst-case scenario. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was surrounded on all sides by a pack of wolves. 6 or 7 of them, if I had to guess. Some of them were snarling at me, and some of them were just staring. But it was clear to me that, to them, I was a meal. I wasn't going to go down without a fight, though. I had my knife out, even though I knew the odds were stacked against me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is actually how I'm going to die. Alone in the woods because I was too stubborn to stick to the marked trails. I was trying to decide if I should make myself big or stay still or what, when every single wolf suddenly went rigid. All at once, too. Not like they were reacting to each other, but rather all reacting to something else. Their ears shot up, and they all looked in the same direction, somewhere over my shoulder. And then they just scattered. Scattered as in full-on sprint in the opposite direction from where they'd been looking, almost like they were the ones being hunted. That's when the fear started setting in for real. Until that point, it had just been a wicked adrenaline rush, which makes sense given the life and death scenario I thought I was in. But once I was alone again, I started getting the creeps. The first thing I noticed after the wolves scampered away was that the woods were completely silent. No wind, no birds, no critters, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch in there. It was still light out, but things felt a little dimmer, sort of how your vision fades when you're lightheaded or right before you're about to pass out. But the worst part by far was why the wolves had run off in the first place. I mean, they had been scared of something, that much was obvious, but whatever could have scared off an entire pack of wolves from a long distance away, I couldn't imagine. I needed to keep moving, but I felt really unsettled, even in the daylight. I kind of wanted to follow the wolves, but I was pretty certain I had been walking in the right direction to begin with. So I was at a crossroads. Follow the wolves just to potentially get encircled again and get even more lost? Or continue in the right direction and possibly encounter whatever it was that had scared them off? An impossible choice. I ultimately decided to keep walking in the direction I thought would take me out of the woods, which meant walking toward whatever it was that the wolves had been freaked out by. My logic was I could waste an hour walking the way the wolves had come from, only to turn around anyway and have to walk back in the dark, or just bite my tongue and walk that way while I still had daylight. So that's what I did. Maybe 20 minutes later, I saw what looked like a clearing up ahead. For a second, I thought it might have been a campsite. I could see what looked like a fire ring, but as I got closer, I realized it was wrong. All wrong. There were symbols carved into the trees surrounding the clearing, not initials or trail markers. These were intentional, deep cuts forming patterns I didn't recognize. It gets worse though. Things were hanging from the branches on what looked like leather cords. Some looked like bones. Small ones, maybe from birds or rodents. Others were metal, rusted, and twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. The fire pit in the center wasn't just a ring of stones. The stones were delicately stacked on top of one another, like structures. There was weird stuff in the fire pit, too. Pieces of cloth, what looked like jewelry, and other objects I couldn't really identify. But here's what made me really freak out. The smoke. There was this thick, black smoke that was just hanging in the air about 6 feet from the ground. It wasn't moving or dissipating, and it didn't look like it was coming from the fire pit either. It was just there. I really wish I could say it was just leftover smoke from the fire pit. The fire pit didn't even look like it had been used recently. I stood at the edge of that clearing. I was frozen to the spot. For some reason, I just couldn't look away from that smoke. My eyes kept tracking back to it, even when I tried focusing on something else. I really have trouble describing the feeling, but it felt like I was looking through a window at something instead of just being there. Like, it felt like I was standing at my kitchen window looking out into the backyard instead of actually being in the backyard. I don't really know what that means, but that's what it felt like. There was this feeling building in my chest, like grief and terror mixed together, but for some reason that hadn't happened yet. It was almost like my body was mourning something in advance. I've never felt anything like it before or since. I must have stood there for 5 minutes just staring at that smoke before something in my brain finally kicked back online. And no, the smoke didn't dissipate in that time. It just stayed there. I finally worked up the strength to turn around and run. I didn't walk or jog, I literally ran. I was overwhelmed with fear. I didn't know what I was running from, but there was this feeling in my gut that told me I needed to get out of the woods. My memory kind of gets foggy after that. I think it's because of how scared I was. So scared that my instincts took over, but part of me thinks the reason my memory faded was somehow connected to whatever the hell was in the woods. The smoke, or the thing that caused the smoke, or something else entirely. I don't know. The next thing I remember is it being dark out, meaning I must have been in those woods for another good hour or so. I was drenched in sweat and, strangely, freezing cold at that point, but I was nearly out of the woods. I was approaching my car. I got in and drove off without another thought, and that was that. I never reported what I found. What would I even say? I couldn't find that clearing again if I tried, and that's even if I remembered things clearly, which I didn't. This will forever be one of those experiences that just doesn't have an explanation. When I told my dad about what happened, he just said that everyone has that one experience sooner or later. Well, this is mine. And the thing that I still think about from time to time is not how those wolves behaved, how that campsite looked, or even that impossible smoke that just hung in the air. It's the memory loss. From all the research I've done, scary moments get remembered better, not worse. So I have no choice but to think that everything that happened that day was connected.
Well, I was down on my last dollar and then I started saving because the bank said fiscal restraint is what you're craving. So I put my earnings in a high yield account.
Back when I was younger, me and my friends loved to go camping. Once we got our licenses at 16, we were out almost every weekend camping in new spots. Our parents didn't really care as long as we were able to protect ourselves. For this reason, my dad let us borrow one of his guns. It was a Taurus G2C. This happened when we were 18 and seniors in high school. In February, me and my girl Megan, my friend Colin and his girlfriend Anne were gonna drive to Arkansas and backpack the Ozarks to look at some natural waterfalls. It was a 9-hour drive from where we lived, so we left early and made it there around 7 p.m. We set up camp at one of the setup sites for the night since it was late and we were tired. My girl and I were sharing a tent, and Colin and his girl were sharing another. I had the gun in my tent. Nothing happened on the first night. The next morning, we woke up and made breakfast and drove to the start of the trail. We were gonna hike to a waterfall and then go find a place to set up camp. On the hike to the waterfall, Anne kept saying she saw someone standing still and staring at her, but he had been following and she hadn't seen him move. So we stopped to look, and we saw a man quickly run away. Colin yelled at him to fuck off or we'll kick his ass, mostly probably for show to impress his girl. We were capable of defending ourselves though if needed. We continued the hike and didn't see him again. We eventually made it to the waterfall, and there we had lunch and took pictures. After about 2 hours, we decided to go find a place to camp before it got dark. While we were looking for a place to set up camp, I noticed a freakishly tall, skinny woman staring at us. She had to be at least 6'5". It genuinely freaked me out. I pointed her out, and everyone else got unsettled too. We yelled at her to leave us alone and told her we had a gun. She turned around and walked away. We decided to hike further since we were all creeped out. We had no idea if the two weirdos were connected somehow. After another hour, we found a nice spot next to a small flowing creek with a relatively deep pool of water. So we decided to get in the water and relax. While we were splashing around, we talked about the earlier incidents and joked that they were probably hillbillies on drugs. When the sun started to set, we we decided to get out and make dinner. We brought chicken breast to grill, rice and vegetables to boil, and some potatoes. We always ate well on our campouts. While I was cooking, Colin set up his tent and helped me with mine. I finished cooking, and we ate before cracking open some of the alcohol we brought. I was, and still am, a pretty heavy smoker, so I brought some weed and papers to roll up. We wanted to have a good time since we put a lot of money into this trip. We told stories and laughed in our intoxicated state. It got to a point where Colin fell out of his chair and just laid on the ground laughing. We did this late into the night and eventually went to our tents. Megan and I were messing around in our tent when we suddenly heard someone laughing outside. At first, I thought it was Colin laughing at us for some reason, so I yelled, "What's so funny?" Colin yelled back, "That wasn't me." That sank my soul and immediately sobered me up. I grabbed the gun, rushed out of the tent, and fired a few shots into the air, yelling for whoever it was to leave us alone or I'd shoot them. That seemed to do the trick because I heard footsteps running away. We moved our tents closer together and decided to have one person stay up at a time as lookout. The next day, we debated going home early, but ultimately decided against it. We were sure we'd scared off whoever it was, so we planned to hike somewhere closer to the exit and camp for one final night. After breakfast, we packed up camp and started the hike back. During the hike, we ran into some other hikers and told them what had happened. They were freaked out too. We chatted for a bit, then continued on. When we stopped for lunch, I realized those were the only other people we'd seen so far, despite there being a ton of cars in the parking lot earlier. After lunch, we continued down the trail, and after about 6 miles, we decided to set up camp. We were around 3 miles from the nearest exit. We pitched our tents and cooked steak and potatoes for dinner. We ate, drank, and smoked again before heading to the tents. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee, so I stepped out of the tent. Out of paranoia, I made sure to bring the gun. While I was peeing, I heard leaves crunching nearby. My heart immediately stopped. I grabbed the gun, finished up, pulled up my pants, and turned on my headlamp. The beam revealed the man from the day before, standing in the distance, holding a machete. I could see him clearly this time. Long, dirty black hair, and super lanky. I screamed and raised the gun as he started charging at me. I fired off every shot I had and must have hit him somewhere, because I heard him yell and saw him fall. By now, Colin, Megan, and Anne were all awake. I told them to pack up. We needed to leave fast. I didn't want to involve the police since I wasn't sure if I could get charged for something. And honestly, his life didn't seem worth it. We didn't bother packing the tents since there wasn't time. We grabbed our bags and practically ran the final 3 miles, making it back to the cars in under an hour. We climbed in, locked the doors, and decided to sleep in the car for the night. We covered the windows and tried to get some rest. When we woke up in the morning, we left immediately and stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town. We never called the cops, and I'm still conflicted about whether we should have. This happened years ago, and no reports about it ever came out. So for all I know, those psychopaths are still out there.
Do you know Hobby Lobby has hundreds of incredible products on sale?
Why do I love having a healthcare concierge?
It's the speaking to a real live person.
It's the making.
It was snowing on this Halloween. Me and my friend group were all planning to have a big night of trick-or-treating, but with the snow coming down pretty heavily, a lot of their parents wouldn't let them out for too long. To be fair, it usually wasn't this bad in October around here, but for the last week, our city was in the middle of an early snowstorm. Anyway, it ended up being just me and my friends John and Hayden. They were still able and willing to go trick-or-treating. We all put on some heavy snow gear, Boots, jackets, hats, all that stuff. Pretty much the only parts of our costumes you could see were the masks we were wearing. We started trick-or-treating. For the first couple hours, there were a decent amount of kids running around doing the same as us. But once the sun got lower, it was basically just us three, walking around in the snow. We continued going door to door, eventually getting up to one of the houses on the corner of the block. There was nothing unusual about it. We went up, knocked on the door, and got candy from the older woman that lived there. But it was when we turned to leave the porch that we walked past a man on the driveway. He had a thick jacket on, and a really creepy mask. More creepy than the typical ones you see, as this one looked kind of realistic, even having long black hair attached to it, draping over his shoulders. Hayden said he recognized the mask as Momo, which, if you were around on the internet about a decade ago, you've probably heard of it. It's unsettling to say the least, but definitely not something most younger kids would be comfortable with seeing, even on Halloween. We all noticed him and felt really weird about it. The man wasn't walking up or down the driveway. He was just standing there in the snow, watching us. We continued down the sidewalk, turning back a few times to look at him, but the blizzard quickly covered up our view of him. I think another thing that made us feel a little uneasy about it was that it was clearly a man, not a kid. He was tall and completely alone out there. So what was he doing? John convinced us to skip a few houses, just to be safe. I don't think any of us wanted to run into that guy again. We crossed over to the next street and got back to going door to door. Have to say, the whiteout from the snow keeping us from seeing anything more than a house or two down the road made things a lot more uncomfortable. We had no idea if the man was still out there. I think 30 minutes passed. The sun was fully down, and even the streetlights were barely beaming through the falling snow. It was around then that John said he had to go back home, since his parents told him to be back by sundown, if it was still snowing. Hayden and I walked with him back to his house, then decided on what to do with just the two of us. I know it hadn't really been that long, but by this point, neither of us were thinking about that creepy man anymore. He hadn't actually done anything, and we never saw him following us, so we had no reason to keep thinking about it. Me and Hayden went to a few more doors and got some more candy, before we both were getting really cold and found ourselves just not enjoying it too much. So Hayden split ways and went back home, leaving me to head back to my house alone. It was about a 15-minute walk away, but in the snow, probably longer. Almost immediately, once it was just me out there, it hardly felt like Halloween. Snow covering every inch of the neighborhood, and nobody else walking around. Literally just me. Once I realized that, I started getting a little paranoid, looking all around and hoping to see another group of trick-or-treaters. But instead, I saw something else. On the other side of the street from the sidewalk I was on, there was a forest, and through the trees, someone was watching me. At first, I just saw his figure, standing far back, and mostly covered by the darkness and the falling snow. But as I continued walking and looking across the street, the figure moved with me, matching my pace and staying in view of me. I started to walk faster, eventually getting to a turn where I could go deeper into the neighborhood, where there were more houses and no forests. But the figure followed. He walked out of the tree line, and when he passed under a streetlight, I saw that same disturbing mask with the long black hair. He must have followed us the entire time, waiting for one of us to be alone. I hurried, moving as fast as I could. The empty and quiet streets made it feel like I was running for my life in an abandoned neighborhood. When I made it home, I locked the door behind me, but for some reason didn't tell my parents what was happening. I just went straight to my room. I guess I was scared to admit that I thought someone was actually following me, as if not admitting it would somehow make it not true. For a few minutes, I just sat on my bed and caught my breath, until the doorbell rang. I immediately felt a chill run through me, knowing that I saw no one else outside while I was running back home. I heard my parents talking, confused that any kids were still out trick-or-treating. My mom went and grabbed some of the candy that they'd already put away. Then she answered the door. As she did, I quietly walked around to the hallway and looked down at who was at the door. My stomach dropped. It was the tall man in the mask, and although I couldn't see his eyes, I know he saw me at the back of the hallway. He didn't even take any candy or say anything to my mom. He just walked away. Likely, the man was hoping I would be alone. My mom found it really creepy and strange, knowing as well that it was an adult, but she assumed it was just a dumb Halloween prank. I never told her what really happened, or what that man was really trying to do that night. My name is Jake, and at the time this happened, I was 29. It was the middle of autumn, and I had drove up to a rental cabin to stay at for a few days. It was a really nice but small cabin in the middle of the woods with a lake behind it. I'd been there a few times already, so it felt almost like a second home to me, somewhere to go when I wanted a short break from everyday life. The first day I got there, I unpacked and spent the whole afternoon settling in, then went out to the lake to watch the sunset. While out there, I noticed someone walking near the lake. Looked like they were walking the perimeter, not doing anything suspicious, so I didn't even think much about it. It was just something I noted. After the sun set, it got way too dark to be staying outside, so I headed back in. There wasn't actually too much to do inside the cabin, other than relax. So it sounds really boring, but I basically just sat on the sofa and chilled there, thinking to myself until I felt ready to go to bed. I turned off all the lights, double-checked the doors were locked, then went to the bedroom, and was on the verge of falling asleep when a sudden voice called out. "Hello? Anyone inside? Hello?" Someone was calling out for me outside of the cabin, asking if anyone was inside, and knocking on the back door. I was so confused and weirded out, I opted to not say anything. Seemed to work, because after just a few minutes, the man walked away. I waited a while, then got up to look around. Couldn't see anything out there. I'm not sure how the guy was even walking around. Definitely creeped me out, but I closed all the curtains, then went back to bed. The rest of that night went smoothly. I woke up in the morning and had some coffee, and really did all the same that day. A couple times I thought about the unknown man that came by in the middle of the night, but with no other information, there wasn't all that much to think about. It was strange, but that was it. I stayed outside later this night, though, having prepared a campfire so I could actually see. An hour or so into sitting out there, I heard some movement in the trees behind me. I turned and looked, but could barely see at all. I figured it was nothing, so I didn't pay it much attention. That was until it happened again. I looked back, but it was quiet. A strange, almost ominous feeling fell over me as I looked out there. I quickly smothered the fire and went back inside, taking one last look over at the woods before closing and locking the door. I could feel that something odd was going on, and I guess I was right, because not 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the back door again. He also called out, asking if I was inside. The man's voice was the same one that I heard last night. I was standing in the hallway, completely stunned. Eventually, after the man continued to knock and call out, I decided to slowly peer around the corner and look at the door. The man's eyes were already staring right at me. He looked disheveled and honestly horrified. That crazy look that insane people have. "Open the door. Please, let me in." I quickly went back behind the wall. The man was aggressive, trying to pressure me into letting him in. I could hear some amount of anger in his voice. I hurried to the bedroom and called 911. Disturbingly, the man must have somehow known, because soon after, he started banging on the bedroom window. He eventually got so aggressive, he cracked the window. But after that, it went quiet. I didn't hear him anymore, and police made it a few minutes later. The man was gone when the officer searched around the cabin, but eerily, blood was on the window along the cracked glass. The man must have been punching the window with his bare fist so hard that he bled, which made the whole thing even more scary as to how insane he was. I never went back to the cabin after that incident. No other information was found as to who the man was, or what he was attempting that night. Where I live, around Halloween, it always gets pretty cold. Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't. But regardless, that's just how it's always been. This year, on Halloween, it had snowed pretty heavily overnight, and by the time trick-or-treat hours had started, it began snowing again. There weren't too many crowds out because of it. I was just chilling inside at home, handing out candy whenever someone did come by, and watching TV by the fireplace to pass the time. All the kids that came by had heavy jackets or coats covering their whole costumes, so the whole Halloween spirit wasn't really hitting too hard this year. As the night went on, the snow started coming down even harder, which sent pretty much all the kids home that were already stubborn enough to still go out in the cold before. 30 minutes went by, with no kids coming to the door. It was around 7 o'clock, and the sun had already set, so I assumed that the trick-or-treating was done for the night. I got up from the living room and started walking over to the door, but immediately was taken aback. The front door was open, swaying in the cold wind that was blowing into the house. I walked over and looked out, not seeing anyone, then closed it. I stood there and thought about it for a second, figuring I probably just didn't fully close it earlier, whenever the last kids came by, and the wind must have pushed it further open. I mean, I knew I didn't lock it, because it was Halloween, and I was constantly opening it anyway. I let it off as nothing to worry about, and went back to the couch. I did open up the curtains by the window, on my way back, just to watch the snow fall. Another few hours went by, as the night got colder and the snow came down even harsher. I had to check the weather a few times to make sure there wasn't some kind of massive blizzard hitting our town. I think it was around 10 that I started to feel tired enough to go to bed, so I turned everything off and went to the kitchen to finish doing some dishes from dinner that I hadn't cleaned up yet. It was just something I did as part of my nightly routine, cleaning up the place before going to sleep. As I was down there putting things away though, I heard what sounded like a creaking noise above me. I literally stopped what I was doing and stared at the blank ceiling, listening to the sound until it quietly faded out. I was kind of in awe for a moment. It sounded just like a door opening. which ironically in the moment I thought sounded way too much like a horror movie to actually be what it was. I finished up downstairs, turned all the lights off, then headed upstairs to go to bed and check on whatever that sound was that I heard. Honestly, I didn't expect to find anything at all, and didn't really care that much. But when I got to my bedroom, I immediately noticed the closet was open. This changed everything for me, instantly making me unsettled. I put everything together between the front door being randomly found open, and then this door also suddenly opening. This couldn't be a coincidence. For good measure, I looked into the closet and didn't see anything. I kinda was hoping there would be something obvious to tell me that something was definitely off. I even checked around the room. I just couldn't see how if someone had snuck inside, why weren't there any other signs of them? Like, where the hell were they? And what was the point of sneaking in, if just to open a few doors? I was still feeling really uneasy, so I shut the bedroom door and locked it, while I paced the room and thought about everything. And at some point, when I happened to be facing the door, I saw something. A shadow right under the door. It only took a few seconds to be almost sure that someone was standing right behind it. I tried not to move or make any sounds, even though, looking back, whoever was behind that door obviously knew I was already in there. I guess I just didn't want them to know that I knew. I must have stood there frozen, staring at the shadow under the door for an entire 2 or 3 minutes. I wanted to call the police, but didn't want them to hear me, which left me just unsure what to do. I think it was actually because I didn't move or make any noise for so long, though, that whoever was behind there must have realized something was wrong and that I was probably onto them. Because the doorknob slowly turned a few times, clicking against the lock. Then the shadow moved away from the door. Maybe they recognized I could see the shadow under the door. I don't know. But after that, I waited for probably 10 minutes straight. I didn't hear anything else or see anything. I had no idea if the person was even still behind the door, let alone in my house. Eventually, I had to call the police, but still tried to be quiet. It seemed like the intruder had left, though, because cops walked in and didn't find anyone else in the house. The whole thing is really just a terrifying mess. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I didn't close and lock the door when I did. Even a few minutes later would have changed everything about that night. Obviously, because I never saw the intruder, I had no info to give the police aside from some possible suspects, like crazy exes or whatever, which I didn't really have. There's no saying who it was or what they were going to do. This was 3 years ago on Halloween. Now, in the few days leading up to October 31st, I had a few strange instances while I was at home. I thought at the time it was just some annoying kids ding-dong ditching my house, but after everything that happened, I'm not so sure. A couple times a day, my doorbell would randomly ring, and every time I'd open it, nobody was there. This happened for several days, until Halloween. I made sure to have the day off of work and handed out candy for most of the afternoon. By 8, nobody else was walking around, so I closed and locked up the house, then went upstairs to my bedroom to watch TV in bed for the rest of the night. I was binging one of my shows, and 2 hours went by like nothing before the doorbell rang downstairs. I assumed it was a late trick-or-treater, but I ignored it because they should know that it was way too late by now. I didn't even pause my show. Several minutes passed, so I figured whoever it was had left. But then the doorbell rang again. Now it was a little strange. Were they just standing outside my door for that whole time, waiting? I felt like now I had to get up and check. I paused the TV and went downstairs, looking out the peephole to see who was on my porch. Nobody was there. That's when I made the connection between this and all the other similar occurrences that happened over the last few days. However, they'd never done it this late though. Something about this time felt different. It gave me chills the longer I looked out at my front porch. I stayed downstairs for a half hour, not feeling safe enough to go back up to my room. Even though I was nervous, I held on to the fact that it very likely could be the same ding-dong ditching that was going on before, which was super frustrating, but ultimately harmless. While I was downstairs, I never heard anyone else outside, or got any signs that anyone was still around. My gut felt like I wasn't totally in the clear, but everything else said otherwise. So I went back upstairs. I left the door to my room open, just in case if anything was going on, I'd hopefully be able to hear it. I continued watching my show for another hour, and after finding myself getting sleepy, I turned it off, got ready for bed, and fell asleep. As it's probably no surprise, I woke up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. I jolted up and stared at the open bedroom door, the sound of the doorbell still echoing through the halls. But something wasn't right about it. It was a different sounding ring. I got out of the bed and walked into the hallway, no idea what the hell was going on. The whole house was dark, but right at the top of the stairs, in the middle of the hall, there was something on the ground. I felt my face go pale because I knew nothing was there before. I walked up to it, and as I got closer, it made that same doorbell sound that had woken me up. It was some kind of recording playback device, just one of those small cheap handheld ones. But more horrifying was thinking about how the hell did it get here? Someone had to be inside my home. This had to be some sort of trap though, knowing the sound would lure me out into the hallway. It was as I came to that realization that I heard a few thumps behind me. I turned around. No one was there, but one of the doors in the hallway was now open. I instantly took off running down the stairs. I went straight to the front door, swinging it open and almost slamming into a person standing right at the front door. He had on an all-black cloaked costume with a pale black and white mask over his face. I quickly backed up and slammed the door shut, but heard footsteps sprinting down the stairs I just came from. I ran for the back door as the front door swung back open and two sets of footsteps came up behind me. I made it out and jumped my fence, then made a dead sprint for the trees. The men didn't seem to be able to follow me. I was able to get help and have the police come over, which of course by then it was kind of pointless. Most likely, this whole thing was some sort of scheme. By ringing the doorbell over and over for a whole week, I was less alarmed when I heard it that night, so I didn't call the police right away. And after breaking in, the men probably just wanted to mess with me by setting up the recorder and everything, just to scare me into running into the man waiting for me at the front door. Basically just two unhinged men having fun mentally torturing me before probably kidnapping me, or maybe even worse. I moved away when I could, and nothing has happened at all since that night. This happened not too long ago when I was 26. Being older, Halloween hadn't been that big of a deal to me for probably a decade. It was sort of just another day to me. This year, I had most of the day off, but worked overnight from 10 to 6 a.m. I was a stalker for a local grocery store, so most nights were quiet, where I just work alone and at my own pace. By the time I left the house, the streets and sidewalks were already empty. No trick-or-treaters running around. However, when I parked and walked up to unlock the door and let myself in, I saw a couple of people around the side of the building in costumes. Didn't think much of it. Maybe some people just meeting up for whatever reason. I went in and relocked the doors, then started working. I was moving between the back warehouse and the aisles, stocking the shelves and doing all the usual. It really wasn't too long into my shift when I thought I heard someone say something outside the store. I went up to the front and saw that same group of people. They were close to the front windows, looking like maybe they were walking around. For reference, the store sat alone in a massive parking lot. There were some other buildings near it, but all unoccupied, so really the only reason to be in this parking lot was for the grocery store I worked at. But obviously, we weren't open. I stayed near the front and kept an eye on them. They passed by and were gone for 10 minutes, before coming back around. I wish I could have seen more of what they were actually doing, but the costumes they had on made it hard to tell if they were looking inside the store windows, or just standing near them. Either way, it was weird that they were hanging around here for so long, and for no reason. Couldn't see why they didn't walk around somewhere else. Eventually, I had to get back to working in other parts of the store, so I left the front. An hour or so went by. I'd been moving through the aisles, filling the shelves, and having one earbud in to listen to music while I worked. I was in one of the end aisles, far from the front, when I heard a knock at the door. It was 3 loud bangs against the glass. It startled me, but I quickly ran up to the front of the store to see who it was. I immediately saw the 4 guys in costumes, standing grouped up at the front, facing the window I was behind. I knew they saw me, and were clearly looking at me. I walked up closer and yelled through the glass, asking what they needed. As I stood there, I very quickly noticed none of them had bags or pillowcases for trick-or-treating. It would have been weird if they were still trick-or-treating at this time of night, let alone trying to at a closed grocery store. But at least it would have shown me that they might have been earlier, which would explain the costumes. Now it seemed like they were just wearing costumes to hide who they were. Not a single one of their faces was visible, and none of them responded. They just stood there, looking at me. I got really uncomfortable, but thought this could all be some Halloween prank, and honestly wasn't worth my time. I left and went back to the aisle I was in before. I still felt really weird about it, but held on to the idea that they were just doing something stupid to mess with me. Maybe they saw me walking inside earlier and thought it'd be funny. But it very quickly went much further than a simple joke. It wasn't 2 minutes later that there was an insanely loud thud against the glass at the front of the store. And before I could even make it to the end of the aisle to look, a second, even louder thud hit the glass, and was followed by what sounded like the door crashing open. I froze, hearing footsteps running in. I turned and sprinted to the back of the store. I was so scared I didn't even grab my bag that had my keys and wallet in it. I just sprinted straight out the back door, going to the road and continuing to run. When I had a chance to breathe, I called the police. By then, everyone was gone. We did have security footage though, showing exactly what happened, but it really didn't give any information that I didn't already know. The guys were hanging around outside the store for a couple of hours, and then smashed something against the door to break it open. They immediately ran in, and were looking for me, which was the most horrifying part. They searched everywhere, one of them even having run to the back of the store and looked for me just 15 seconds after I got away. Had he seen me, the whole group might have chased me down the road, and things might have not ended so well for me. Ultimately, that was where things left off. What the group was actually wanting to do, and all the other questions I have, remain unknown.